There are places in Appalachia where the trees lean in too close, where wind hushes louder than it howls, and where the past is not buried, but rooted. At the outer edge of Allegheny Ridge, just past where the gravel ends and the pine needles begin, there's a stretch of land that doesn't appear on topographic surveys after 1931. It was once part of Ashridge Hollow, a forgotten bend in Preston County, long since stripped from most county maps and erased from postal records. But one file remained. In the dusty bottom drawer of a rusted filing cabinet labeled Unincorporated Cases, vaulted, tucked away in the sealed archives of the Preston County Coroner's Office, a memo dated March 3, 1942, re-emerged like a thorn in the throat of history. The document, marked Doc number 874-B, was never meant to be seen again. Yellowed and brittle, it bore the signature of a coroner whose name doesn't appear in any other death record for that decade. But the contents of that file were unignorable. According to the typed sheet, the body of Ruth Ashridge, aged 62, was discovered by 2 county surveyors assessing flood erosion near Deerhorn Trail, an abandoned timber path 3 miles east of where Ashridge Hollow once stood. The body was found hanged upside down from a pine tree nearly 40 feet tall. Her limbs were rigid, not from cold, but from binding, a coarse roped fiber wrapped in triple loops around her ankles and shoulders, suspending her like a pendulum above a forest floor that bore no human tracks except their own. Her mouth had been packed with pine needles, not loosely, not suggestively, but compacted with surgical precision, like kindling before a fire. The coroner's note stated the oral cavity was so densely filled it could not be dislodged without cracking the molars. Her eyelids were sewn shut with linen thread that appeared homemade, and the stitch pattern, running horizontally across both sockets, was described as intentional, not crude, with a double knot at each corner like closed quotation marks. The base of the tree, as detailed in the forensic sketch stapled to the report, was encircled with 12 iron nails, each spaced exactly 3 feet apart. Between them sat 12 rawhide dolls, their torsos carved from pine bark, their arms made from stitched animal sinew. Each doll was missing its left eye. None bore faces, only small notches on their chests that formed symbols not recognized in any documented religious practice. The coroner noted a faint scorch mark in the dirt, as if something once smoldered, but no ashes or wood fragments were found. And then came the note, handwritten in black ink and stapled to the back of the final page. It was unsigned, unsourced, and without any official log. It simply read, "This was part of it." The forest asked. She answered. The file ends there. No follow-up, no investigation, no press clipping, no indication that the death was ever entered into the West Virginia State Death Registry. The listed cause of death, accidental asphyxiation, appears to have been chosen not out of medical certainty, but as a placeholder for something no one dared name. There is no autopsy, no mention of family, no fingerprint analysis. Ruth Ashridge was found, recorded, and quietly vanished from legal existence for a second, and perhaps final, time. But who was Ruth Ashridge? Her name appears on a 1918 Deerhorn mining accident ledger, where she is listed as a surviving widow of 3 brothers lost in a shaft collapse that buried 22 miners under a slurry of mud and blackstone. After that, the trail goes cold. No marriage record, no census listing, no land deed, no obituary. But a 1921 county ledger for timber tax payments lists R. Ashridge as submitting payment in bark, resin, and tallow, marked accepted. There's a long-standing belief in these mountains, passed down in whispers between midwives and gravediggers, that some debts can be paid in offerings, that the forest remembers names better than the courthouse ever could. And perhaps that's why the condition of the body confused even those with decades of forensic training. Because Ruth Ashridge, according to the coroner's notes, showed no signs of decomposition. Her skin, though pale, was still pliant. No bloating, no insect activity. Her fingernails had been recently trimmed. Her eyes, though sewn shut, bore no evidence of rot. Only the scalp showed any wear, a slow seep of sap-like fluid pooled beneath the hairline, with the faint smell of ironwood and old milk. The two surveyors who found her, identified only as L. Kemper and J. Durst in the logbook, never returned to work. One relocated to Ohio. The other, Durst, was institutionalized in 1946 after a series of night terrors and unprovoked episodes of mutism. His wife, in a 1953 interview with the Morgantown Gazette, said only, "He won't talk about the woman in the trees. He said she wasn't dead, just waiting for the rest to follow." The most chilling detail, perhaps, is the absence of birdsong in the area. Even now, hikers who stray near that stretch of Allegheny Ridge report a profound, unnatural silence, as if the woods are listening, but unwilling to speak. The air smells heavier, like wet copper and damp wool, and according to one forestry student's field journal from 1998, the pine tree in question, now warped and split, still bleeds a dark, viscous sap in winter. No other pine in the area does. So the question rises, and it does not settle easily in the mouth. Was this madness? Was this the final unraveling of a forgotten woman caught in religious psychosis, making sense of grief through ritual and delusion? Or was this something older, a blood agreement made by a family who gave more than flesh to the land that fed them? A generational compact, signed not in ink, but in sap, silence, and submission. Because Ruth Ashridge was not buried. She was offered. And the forest, it seems, accepted. If your people ever warned you not to follow Deerhorn Trail, if your family once carried the name Ashridge and kept it quiet, if your childhood drawings ever circled trees with eyes, or if you've dreamt of dolls with bark for bones, leave your name, comment below, write what they never wrote down, and subscribe, because every name we remember, every silence we break, is another file brought back from the forest they tried to forget. In an archived copy of the 1909 Preston County Mineral Surveyor's Ledger, the town of Ashridge Hollow is mentioned exactly once, a dry line nestled between records of coal extraction volumes and timber assessments. The entry reads, Ashridge Hollow, population 127, unincorporated, workforce allocated to Deerhorn Shaft 3, elevation decline noted. There is no postal code, no founding date, no mayor or charter, just that one line surrounded by notes on stone density and shale depth. And then, after 1911, nothing. The town vanishes. Maps shift, borders rewrite, routes divert, and Ashridge Hollow becomes a rumor with coordinates. The place was never meant to grow large, but it grew fast. From 1897 to 1910, an influx of miners, loggers, and spiritual sects moved into the hollowed basin between Deerhorn Ridge and Devil's Knob, drawn in by the promise of coal veins running thick under the mossy earth. According to Preston County Land Office files from 1904, Deerhorn Coal Company leased over 1,300 acres of mineral rights in the region, land that had previously been unclaimed or marked unfit due to saturation. But coal was king, and people settled where it whispered. Among them were the Ashridge family, recorded in the 1900 census as living in Sector 2 of the settlement, with a 3-room homestead, 3 sons employed in shaft operations, and one elder, Ruth Ashridge, listed simply as unpaid domestic. No photographs exist of the family, no medical records. But the ledger lists their contribution to the mine as exceeding expectation, a phrase repeated for only 2 other families, the Merrows of Boone Run and the Hewitts of Cold Creek, both of whom later vanished under similarly strange silences. It's hard to say whether the town collapsed from tragedy, or if the tragedy merely justified the town's disappearance. On February 14, 1911, Shaft 3 of the Deerhorn mine collapsed inward during an unregistered night shift, burying 43 workers, including 3 men named Ashridge, assumed to be the sons of Ruth. Only 6 bodies were ever retrieved. The others, according to a coroner's field log filed the next morning, were lost under a permanent earth fall, with recovery deemed too dangerous due to instability and gas seepage. The mine was sealed. The shaft entrance was marked with a cross made from pine wood. Within 3 months, Deerhorn Coal filed for bankruptcy, citing structural fraud and geological miscalculations. By the end of that year, Ashridge Hollow was unofficially abandoned. But abandoned doesn't mean forgotten. A 1912 flood report filed by the West Virginia Division of Watershed Management described unseasonal runoff and river expansion originating from the hollow, despite no rainfall or snowmelt reported in the area. A year later, the Preston County School Board suspended bus routes to the nearby Black Hill School, stating unreliable road conditions due to spontaneous erosion in the region. Parents were advised not to allow children to cross near the hollow alone. By 1920, all reference to Ashridge Hollow was removed from updated county property deeds, with parcels once bearing homes and roads now marked non-developable due to silt contamination and structural rot. Yet no rot was ever catalogued. No trees were felled, no buildings demolished. It's as if the land decided to consume itself, removing the lines that had once defined it. In a 1936 County Planning Board meeting, archived under Public Works Case number 419-B, engineer Samuel C. Brotherton stated bluntly during a hearing on regional development, "We won't be building near Ashridge. The land feels wrong. It's not just a floodplain, it's spiritually unfit for habitation." That quote made it into the minutes, verbatim. No one on the board objected. No one asked for clarification. The project was rerouted 30 miles east. The soil samples collected from Ashridge Hollow over the years tell a fractured story. A 1951 Department of Agriculture study found elevated iron levels and strange bacterial blooms not present elsewhere in Preston County, samples that turned viscous when removed from the ground. A botanist from Morgantown, conducting an independent survey in 1963, noted that pine trees within the hollow grew in spirals, not rings, their trunks coiling slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward a central point no one could identify. When she returned the following year, her funding had been pulled. Her notes had vanished. Sensory reports from the area, though anecdotal, suggest a profound unease. Residents of nearby Nettlebrush and Cedar Bridge often warned travelers not to stop near the old trailhead. In a 1974 interview with the Allegheny Weekly Dispatch, Elijah Trummell, a retired park ranger, said, "We'd send interns in there to mark deer trails, and they'd come back shaking. One girl just kept saying she heard humming under her boots. Another claimed the trees were whispering prayers." Of course, no official record acknowledges these claims, just like no file lists what happened to the mail, because Ashridge Hollow did once have a postal code, WV-10312, assigned briefly in 1908, then revoked in 1913, just 2 years after the mine collapse. The U.S. Postal Service cited inaccessibility and irregular deliveries, though no photographs or architectural reports remain of the original post office. All that exists is a single envelope, now housed in a private collection, postmarked Ashridge Hollow, February 11, 1911. The ink has faded. The return address is smudged, but inside is a blank card and a pine needle pressed flat between parchment. For years, the story of the town was treated as an oddity, a footnote in mining history, an eerie tale passed around campfires. But something deeper has taken root in the archives. Property tax ledgers from 1927 list Ruth Ashridge as active, even though her supposed death had already been assumed in 1918. The payment field notes rendered in dried bark, medicinal resin, and bundled teeth. No payment was rejected. They say some towns are forgotten by time, but Ashridge Hollow wasn't forgotten. It was actively buried, choked out of the records, paved over with silence. A town that fell not because the earth gave way, but because something beneath it called for quiet. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And still, to this day, If you walk the northern bend of Deerhorn Trail, long since closed, its marker stone covered in moss, you may find that your compass spins, that your phone dies, that birdsong fades into something colder, something that doesn't belong in open air. A few amateur hikers have posted stories online over the years, tales of shoes filled with mud despite dry trails, of waking with bark under their fingernails, of standing at a grove that doesn't exist on the map, only to look away for a second and find that neither does the trail. There are no official warnings, no fencing, nothing to suggest a town was ever there, no cornerstone, no gravestones, not even the rusted remains of a well. But the air knows, and the ground does not forget. In the brittle pages of the 1880 U.S. Census, under the enumeration district for Preston County, West Virginia, the Ashridge name appears for the first time, a single household listed at the end of the register, scrawled hastily in a different handwriting than the others. Robert Ashridge, 41, occupation marked as minor. Miriam Ashridge, 37, housekeeper. 3 daughters, no sons, no birthplaces listed, no adjacent households within 3 miles, no subsequent notes. By 1900, a second entry shows up. R. Ashridge, female, widowed, age 21, listed without a street address but marked as residing at the base of Deerhorn Pines. And then, after that, the name disappears entirely. No Ashridges appear in the 1910, 1920, or 1930 U.S. Census. Not a single one. As though the family line broke, dissolved, or chose, deliberately, to step outside the record-keeping of a world that never really welcomed them to begin with. And yet, their presence lingers, woven through fringe records, half-legible church registries, and orphaned field notes that feel like fragments of a larger horror no one dared write down, in full. In the Cedar Grove Baptist Church's marriage book, a cracked leather-bound ledger held in a humidity-damaged basement archive, 3 entries between 1899 and 1907 note the marriages of Ashridge daughters, Lenora, Sabine, and Elsbeth, each joining men from Tucker County or Randolph, each marked with an asterisk instead of a blessing. The officiating minister's margin note reads simply, "No hymns permitted. Bride brought own candles. Witnesses unknown." These are the only Ashridge connections that surface in known church records. And yet, no birth records appear for the next generation. Not in Preston, not in Tucker, not even in the far, unincorporated outposts where local registrars were known to record baptisms on wood slate. It's as if the bloodline merged with the trees, passed hand to mouth in silence, or never passed at all. Then there is the Cedar Grove school attendance log from fall 1927, tucked between blank pages and water damage. Page 12, entry 6, Ruth A. No surname, no age, no guardian listed. The column marked home address is left empty, but under remarks, the teacher's note stands out, does not respond to direct questioning, brings carved dolls, places them on window ledge during lessons. That same year, 3 students were withdrawn from class citing emotional discomfort. 1, Della Broom, age 8, was treated at the Morgantown Children's Hospital for a recurring night terror, in which a faceless girl with dolls for hands stood at the foot of her bed, humming something that made the wallpaper peel. County medical records from the time cite no explanation. The case file was closed within a week, but the doll, retrieved from Della's bed frame, now resides in the State Folklore Archives, cataloged as Appalachian Root Object, Type C. It is made of pine bark, animal sinew, and baby's breath flowers pressed into the skull cavity. Its left eye is missing. The tag simply reads, possibly Ashridge. The story of the Ashridge family begins to shift in tone when you enter the domain of oral histories. Records not preserved in ink, but passed by mouth and memory, often dismissed by historians but retained by locals like a fever never sweated out. In the Preston County Oral Testimony Project, compiled between 1972 and 1976, 5 separate interviewees, aged 65 and older, referenced the Ashridge name in connection with what they described as pact-keeping. Not witchcraft, not satanic rites. Something older, something closer to the earth and its demands. They didn't ask for power, and they didn't pray for luck, said Morris Galton, age 89, in a 1975 interview. They just paid what the forest asked. That's what a pact is. You pay it forward. You don't question the terms. You don't ever ask for it back. Another account from Sylvie Hawthorne, age 78, recorded in 1973. My mama said they lived at the edge of the pine stretch. The trees that don't grow right, they spiral when they get tall. You ever seen pine bark twist like it's wringing itself out? That's where they lived. They said the roots there weren't for walking over, they were for kneeling. In these stories, the Ashridges were midwives, root doctors, or something worse. Herbalists who spoke only in dreams, who never asked for coin, only for something you'd miss later, a memory, a favorite tooth, a night's sleep. It's said that children born with sickness were taken to the pine edge, and if they came back alive, they came back changed. Local legends speak of a child named Willa Ashridge, never recorded in any document, who cried without sound and could only be soothed by placing a circle of red berries under her tongue. Others whisper of the Ashridge girl with no breath, said to sleep in a hollow log and only wake when the air turned warm. In 1958, a psychiatric report from the Whitley Asylum for Women, sealed and later leaked through a FOIA request, documents the intake of a woman in her 50s found wandering near Ashridge Hollow. She had no ID, no shoes. She gave only the name Ruth Ashridge. Medical notes describe her as lucid but unresponsive to modern date references. She insisted the year was 1904 and claimed her brothers were under the roots, not dead, just feeding. The attending psychiatrist's final note reads, "Subject does not display traditional signs of schizophrenia. No break in eye contact, no paranoia. Rather, she exhibits belief in a system of payment, ritualistic, ancient, and absolutely consistent. She claims she was promised long life beneath the pine and that she's returned now that the forest is hungry again. She died 6 days later. Cause of death listed as natural cardiac failure, but autopsy photos show fine thread scarring on the eyelids and pine resin under her fingernails. As unsettling as these stories are, the strangest details are always the smallest. In every property deed filed for Ashridge Hollow between 1899 and 1926, the signature line for buyers and sellers was marked not with pen, but with impressions of pine needles pressed into the parchment. Tax payments were made in bundles of dried herbs, not cash. Boundary lines, when marked, were drawn using circles of nails, not fences or stones. It is this internal logic, this symbolic system of exchange and silence, that makes the Ashridge family so difficult to categorize. They were not outcasts. They were not leaders. They were kept like secrets, remembered by the land and feared by the people who came after, but never acknowledged in full by the state or its archives. A bloodline that chose the forest over the ledger, or perhaps more disturbingly, was chosen by it. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And even now, the trees that grow at the edge of Deerhorn Trail, where the Ashridge house once stood, still grow in unnatural symmetry. Their roots do not stretch outward. They sink straight down, like cables holding something beneath the soil. In the brittle minutes of a 1914 disciplinary record from the now abandoned First Pentecostal Chapel of Blackwater, one name is underlined in ink that has since rusted brown: Ruth Ashridge. Her name appears only once, under the heading Excommunication due to idolatry and false doctrine. The meeting notes are concise, nearly clinical in tone, but a marginal annotation near the bottom, scribbled hastily and slanting into the spine of the ledger, reads, "Refused to burn her scripture, claimed the pines remember what the crosses forget." This was not the first time the Ashridge name had stirred discomfort among the mountain congregations. nor would it be the last. From church basements to county libraries, tucked between handwritten funeral sermons and old temperance pledges, traces of a belief system practiced by the Ashridge family still surface like mold. Quiet, clinging, and thriving best in places no longer touched by sunlight. The scripture in question, the one Ruth refused to burn, was later confiscated by the church elders and turned over to Reverend Horace Penn, a circuit preacher who served several congregations between Preston and Tucker counties. The document, preserved only in fragments due to fire damage in the 1936 parsonage blaze, is now cataloged in the West Virginia Folklore Archive as Ashridge Psaltery A. It is a notebook, its pages hand-bound with birch twine, its margins stained with what analysts called plant-derived resin of unknown botanical origin. Inside, the psalms are rewritten. Familiar cadences twist into something older, still recognizable in rhythm, but infused with language that worships something deeper than stone altars or heavenly salvation. One passage stands out in the scanned archive. He is the bark, the sap, the root who remembers. His limbs stretch where graves cannot. Beneath his breath, the worms sleep sweet. These rewritten hymns, according to religious historian Dr. Eliza Wren, exhibit signs of post-Christian animism, a belief system where nature is not merely created by God, but is the repository of memory itself, with trees acting as keepers of covenant, especially pines, which were thought to whisper back if you listened long enough with your mouth closed. A 1921 entry from Reverend Daniel Coulter, a traveling preacher from Raleigh County, describes one of his visits to Ashridge Hollow. His journal, recovered in part after his disappearance in 1924, recounts, "They hung trinkets in the trees, not for beauty. Said it kept the sickness out. Said the forest spoke in dreams, asked for trade. Children bore thread-wrapped bones on their belts. Not game bones, finger-sized. I asked who taught them to sing that way. They said, Grandma Ruth taught us. The pine gave her the tune." In the same journal, the preacher makes a final, chilling note before the entry ends mid-sentence. "They buried a tooth beneath my boot print. I did not feel it until the bleeding started." That ritual of burying objects beneath uninvited feet appears in at least 3 other field reports, including a 1955 account by Howard Brinkley, a forestry worker sent to assess pine bark beetle damage near Deerhorn Trail. His case file, now partially redacted, was reopened in 1978 during a government-funded rural mysticism survey, which confirmed that Brinkley had experienced intense hallucinations and dissociative fugue states after returning from the hollow. His boots were later found packed with pine needles and clumps of human hair, despite no signs of bodily injury. Brinkley's only recorded statement, taken during a brief lucid window at the Morgantown Neurological Hospital, was this: "It wasn't them trying to scare me. It was them trying to remember me, to keep me, to root me in." These beliefs, that the forest remembers and bargains, were passed primarily through rituals taught to children, not written doctrine. Interviews collected in the Preston County Children's Folklore Initiative, 1968 to 1972, document dozens of accounts from elders who recall growing up with strange phrases and customs. Children were taught to feed the roots, not metaphorically but literally. Offerings included baby teeth, strands of hair, scabs peeled from knees, even fingernail clippings bound in wool. In one testimony from Flora Neely, age 82, recorded in 1970, she recalled, "Mama said when your tooth falls out, don't give it to the tooth fairy. You wrap it in thread, whisper your sin, and bury it under the pine with your left hand. That way the root takes it, not the crow." When asked what happened if the root didn't accept it, she simply said, "You'd know." The wind wouldn't stop until morning. Another element frequently repeated across generations is the belief in dream bargains, a form of spiritual transaction where desires were offered to the forest in sleep, and the response came as visions, fevers, or songs. In Whitley Sanitarium, case file 202-A, patient Clara Ashridge, admitted in 1933, was documented humming nonverbal lullabies in a sleep-like state, with melody notations closely matching the tone sequence of Appalachian funerary hymns, but played in reverse key. Her attending physician wrote, "Patient claims she was taught to hum toward the trees, said the forest would take the illness and bury it under the older pines, requests to be returned to the hollow every new moon." Clara died in 1934. Her body was never collected. The release form was signed by someone named R. Ashridge, in handwriting matching a church ledger from 1911. While no known church in the region adopted the Ashridge rites formally, a collection of anti-sermons surfaced in the late 1940s, tucked into hymnals at rummage sales and donated libraries. Each pamphlet bore no author, but included passages that twisted recognizable religious verse into warnings, not against sin, but against forgetting. One fragment reads, "He will not strike down the sinner. He will root the forgetful. Only those who bury know peace. Only those who offer sleep." It is this internal moral logic, one not based in punishment but payment, that gives the Ashridge system its terrifying consistency. Sin is not judged, it is traded. Pain is not feared, it is offered. And memory is not blessed, it is bound. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. To this day, no formal denomination acknowledges these rituals. They exist only in recovered notebooks, hushed oral fragments, and dolls nailed to the backs of trees with no paths leading to them. But hikers in the area still speak of unease, not the fear of violence, but the feeling of being seen by something old and patient, something that listens without ears and waits without hunger. And to this day, no birds land near the chimney, no matter the season, no matter the wind. In the county records vault beneath the Preston County School Board building, buried between decades of mundane disciplinary reports and outdated lunch rosters, lies a faded 3-page incident report stamped in pale blue ink. Filed April 12, 1940, Laurel Fork Elementary School, Incident 211-A. The paper is thin, almost translucent now, and marked by what appears to be old sap along the upper margin. It's been misfiled twice, mislabeled once, and nearly discarded during a 1969 document purge. But for some reason, someone stapled a single note to the front in red grease pencil. "Hollow children. Escalate if duplicate found." The report was filed by Edith Moore, the school nurse on duty that day. She had been employed at Laurel Fork Elementary for 15 years and had never filed a single behavioral complaint before. But what she described on that April morning prompted an immediate, though ultimately suppressed, reaction from the county. According to Moore's statement, 3 children arrived late to school that day. All were barefoot despite the chill in the air. Their feet were raw, laced with cuts from briars and brambles, and each child's skin bore dark streaks of pine tar from the knees down. Their clothes, though not torn, smelled strongly of wet wood and mildew. The oldest, a boy of around 9, carried a bundle of twine-wrapped pine cones tied together with scraps of what looked like animal sinew. The girl, perhaps 7, would not make eye contact. She stood still for nearly 10 minutes, her arms at her sides, lips parted, silently mouthing something Nurse Moore could not hear. The youngest child, a boy of 6, was the only one who spoke. When asked where their shoes were, he replied without blinking, "Mama says the roots drink if we don't talk." The nurse's initial assumption was exposure or abuse, but the report quickly veers into the kind of language not commonly used in professional documentation. She notes, in handwriting that becomes shakier as the report continues, "The children didn't blink, not once. Their hair was matted with something sticky, darker than sap. When I tried to check the girl's eyes, she hummed low and sharp, and the boy began to chant. Not words, not English, just sound. I've never heard a sound like it." Later that day, the children were removed from the school by sheriff's deputies and turned over to the Preston County Child Welfare Office. No follow-up interview was ever conducted. The intake form from that day has been lost or removed. 3 days after the incident, Margaret Delling, the classroom teacher responsible for grades 1 through 3 at Laurel Fork Elementary, submitted her resignation letter by mail. It was a single sheet of paper, folded once, with only 5 lines written in fountain pen. "I've taught in this county for 27 years. I've never feared a child, until now. The trees hum after noon. The boy's eyes are too old. I will not return." Delling was never contacted again. Her resignation was accepted without question. She left Preston County by summer and died in 1951 in Raleigh, North Carolina, without ever speaking publicly about what she had seen. The only known public reference to the event came from a short-lived regional paper, the Preston Evening Record, printed April 13, 1940, with a headline that read, "Children removed from Hollow. Sheriff cites unclean living conditions." The article was only 5 paragraphs long and contained no photographs. It referred to the children only as unnamed juveniles from the Ashridge Hollow vicinity, and stated that they were placed into temporary custody pending domestic clarification. It briefly mentioned Nurse Moore's concerns, but framed them as overreaction due to recent flu-related strain. The final line of the article reads, "No further investigation necessary. Sheriff states the matter is closed and not for public concern." The next day's issue was pulled from circulation. The newspaper office issued a brief apology and retracted the story in full, citing printing error and miscommunication with law enforcement. Within weeks, the Preston Evening Record was quietly absorbed by the Morgantown Dispatch, and its archives were sealed for over 3 decades. But the story didn't end with the pulled paper, because 3 weeks later, an anonymous letter was mailed to the West Virginia Department of Child Welfare, postmarked from Clarksburg. It described children speaking in dry voices, roots tied with teeth, and a chant that grew louder when the adults left the room. The letter ended with a sentence that has since become central to researchers of the Ashridge case. "They weren't raised like us. They were grown under bark, not born." The children were placed into a temporary shelter outside of Morgantown, but within 2 weeks, all 3 had reportedly vanished. There are no formal missing persons reports under their names, likely because no names were ever formally recorded. A 1943 internal document from the WV Office of Juvenile Affairs, labeled Case Number 7443-B, includes a footnote about 3 unidentified minors, aged 6 to 10, noted as discharged due to family reunification. The final note simply reads, "Records closed. Children relocated per R. Ashridge." The handwriting on that final line has been matched by forensic analysts to the 1914 excommunication file from Blackwater's Pentecostal Chapel. The signature is not printed. It's a pressed imprint of pine needles, identical in pattern and pressure point distribution. The same mark was later found on the underside of a pew recovered from Ashridge Chapel, discovered buried in mud and silt following the 1957 flood that unearthed part of the old roadbed near the hollow. What the children were chanting has never been deciphered. Audio logs, if they existed, have not surfaced. But a 1965 interview with Elijah Banner, who was a janitor at the Laurel Fork School in the 1940s, includes a haunting recollection. He said, "The youngest one sat in the hallway and rocked like he was in a cradle. He rubbed his thumb on the floor over and over until it bled, and then he pressed it to the crack between the boards, like he was feeding something below." When asked what happened after, Banner paused before responding. Nothing changed, except after that, the trees didn't sound like trees anymore. Sounded like someone whispering too soft to hear, but too close to ignore. No further public reports came from Laurel Fork Elementary. The building still stands, barely. It was shuttered in 1962 and left to rot. But hikers occasionally pass by the broken husk of the structure and report that the floorboards groan long after the wind stops. Some say you can still see handprints in the soot along the lower walls. Others say if you knock on the gymnasium door 3 times and wait, you'll hear a 4th knock back from the inside. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And to this day, the trees near Laurel Fork lean slightly west, even when the wind blows east. If your family once spoke of children who weren't allowed near pine trees, if you've ever heard chanting in your dreams that didn't match any language you know, if your grandmother warned you to never leave your shoes at the edge of the woods, leave your record. Comment what they told you. Add your verse to what they tried to silence. And subscribe. Not just to follow the story, but to reopen what's been sealed. Because if they pulled the story once, they might try again. The file labeled Breyer, Eleanor, patient number 61144, Ward C. Admitted June 6, 1972, was once held in a locked cabinet in the basement archives of Charleston State Hospital, a sprawling institution whose original brick foundations were laid in 1885 and whose walls absorbed more confessions than most churches. But Eleanor's file, unlike the others, bore a red cloth ribbon threaded through the cover, knotted once at the top. The tag stapled to it read, "Do not dispose. Hold for coroner's follow-up." The follow-up never came. Eleanor Breyer, age 80, was committed after a series of erratic public episodes in which she was found wandering near the Charleston riverfront, carrying a small bark and twine doll in a baby blanket. According to the Charleston Police Field Report, she was barefoot, disoriented, and muttering a song that repeated no discernible words but followed a strange, descending melodic pattern. When questioned by officers, she gave her name and said she had lived in Charleston since 1932, which was later confirmed by property tax records for a boarding house on West Elm Street. But what confused officers was the name she listed as her emergency contact, Ruth Ashridge, my grandmother who hums through the trees. That name, again, Ruth Ashridge, appearing not as history, not as a ghost, but as a living presence in the mind of a woman who had spent her life outside of any known branch of the Ashridge bloodline. In her admittance interview conducted by Dr. Walter Penn, Eleanor spoke in detail about a girl she once knew, though no birth record or school enrollment ever placed Eleanor in Preston County or anywhere near Ashridge Hollow. And yet, she described the terrain with uncanny precision. The curve of Deerhorn Trail, the leaning pine grove behind the rusted swing post, the ridge where the roots came up at night like teeth. She was taught to listen to the roots, Eleanor said during her recorded session. They told her the forest remembered what people buried and what people forgot. And if I sang her song, she'd come visit me at night, humming. Transcription of that session ends at 2:47 a.m., June 19, 1972. What was not included in the typed report, but written in pen by Dr. Penn in the left margin, is a personal note. Voice changed slightly during the chant. Vocal cords shouldn't be capable of such resonance at her age. Tape distorted. Re-recording failed. Order psychiatric review. The recording of that session no longer exists. It was logged for archiving, but when a medical student attempted to retrieve the cassette for a thesis on geriatric hallucinations, the case envelope was found empty. A small stain of pine-colored resin had soaked through the folder. 2 weeks later, on July 3, 1972, a fire broke out in Ward C, room 4B, where Eleanor had been kept in isolation following a brief screaming episode during her bath. The official cause listed by the Charleston Fire Marshal's office was faulty wiring, aggravated by excess humidity and deteriorated panel insulation. But the nurse on call, Marla Henderson, stated in her unsigned written statement that Eleanor had no electronics in her room, not even a reading light, and that the insulation in that wing had been replaced just the year before. There were no scorch marks on the walls, only along the mattress. The bed frame was warped, and the window blinds had melted into ribbons, but the wooden dresser remained untouched, and inside it, folded beneath a hospital gown, staff found a journal, belonging to Eleanor. The final entry was written in graphite, carved shallowly into the back page. It read, "The doll blinked." The journal was removed from hospital records during the state investigation, but a photocopy was preserved in the Charleston Forensic Review Archive under a mislabeled file marked E.L. Breyer/Fire Response 1972/non-suspicious. Within it, Eleanor speaks, or rather confesses, to a childhood spent not in Charleston, but near a house with no front door, only a curtain of pine boughs. She never names Ruth directly again, but instead refers to her with no breath, she who slept folded in roots, and the old girl who waits with her mouth sewn shut, singing through the trees. She describes, with intimate clarity, the sound of humming in the dirt, and the sensation of her lungs tightening as she tried to echo the tune. She writes, "It is not a song for humans. It is a remembering. It wraps around your ribs and drinks your air. But it knows you. It knows if you forgot." The handwriting in the journal changes near the end. The last 3 pages are written in reverse, not mirrored, but backward lettering. Pale notches scratched into the edge of the paper align perfectly with a pine needle that was found pressed between pages 11 and 12. The fire that took Eleanor's life never spread beyond her mattress. It burned upward, leaving a scorch mark on the ceiling but no trail across the floor. Firemen noted the window was locked from the inside. The sprinkler system had been disabled that day due to a routine maintenance check. Her body was recovered intact but curled inward, hands covering her ears. Her mouth was filled with a soft brown mulch, identified as decayed pine bark, though no pine trees grew within half a mile of the hospital. No family claimed her. Her remains were cremated and held in a state facility until 1993, when a private donor paid to have them buried near Gauley Bridge Cemetery. The donation form was signed R. Ashridge. The address was listed as returned below. To this day, nurses who work the night shift at Charleston State say that room 4B always feels a few degrees colder. That lights dim slightly when you pass the door. That sometimes, only sometimes, you hear the soft sound of someone humming through the vent, even when the room is unoccupied. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And to this day, the fire alarm in that hallway is known to go off without warning, never long, never loud, just a single beep at 2:47 a.m. If you search the Public Archive of Preston County, West Virginia, you will find that a startling number of records from the mid-20th century are simply gone, not lost to age or weather, not misplaced through clerical error, but vanished all at once in a series of events politely labeled in footnotes as file destruction incidents. Between 1956 and 1978, 4 separate requests were filed to investigate the whereabouts of Ashridge Hollow and its surviving residents. All 4 were closed prematurely. Each ended with the same final note: insufficient documentation. No further inquiry recommended. And what those inquiries were trying to recover is as terrifying as what replaced them: silence, fire, and the rot of sanctioned forgetting. The most significant loss came on September 2nd, 1964, when a fire broke out in the Preston County Clerk's building. The blaze began at approximately 3:08 a.m., well outside of business hours. By the time local responders reached the scene, the 3rd floor, housing vital records and criminal case files, was entirely consumed. The flames were localized. They did not spread beyond the single wing. No personnel were harmed, no other structures nearby caught fire. But Box 7, Unincorporated Crimes and Deaths, 1910 to 1949, was listed among the destroyed units. That box contained arrest reports, missing persons logs, and exhumation permits for outlying rural areas, including those that once fell under the jurisdiction of Ashridge Hollow. It was, according to internal memos, the only file box that referenced Hollow-related death certificates, most of which had already been flagged for red label review due to inconsistencies in method of burial or cause of death. The insurance report for the fire estimated the damage at $4,900. The forensic analysis concluded faulty wiring near the ceiling joists. And yet, according to the maintenance ledger submitted just 4 weeks earlier, the wiring in that wing had been updated. The electrician who completed the job, Reuben Castor, later testified in a deposition that he found no faults in the panel and that the circuit box had been reinforced at the county's specific request. When asked if anything in the files looked unusual before the fire, Castor responded under oath. There were these tags, cloth tags, red and stiff, like they'd been dipped in something, all clipped to the spines of the older folders. The ink had run, but I swear one of them said, "Returned below." Castor died in 1965, less than a year later. No cause of death was listed on his death certificate, just the word pending, scratched out and replaced with final. But the suppression didn't begin with the fire. It began with a hush, subtle, clerical, and deeply intentional. A 1956 letter from State Representative Gideon Moffett, now preserved in the West Virginia Historical Legislative Archive, was addressed to the Office of Rural Records Modernization. In it, Moffett requested the formal reclassification of Ashridge Hollow and the surrounding 11 miles as geographically unstable and culturally inactive. This language, according to policy, automatically decommissioned all active case files associated with the area and closed them to future public review. It was a loophole used only 3 times in state history. Ashridge Hollow was the final. Attached to the letter was a handwritten annotation by Moffett's secretary. He said the sheriff told him it wasn't safe to keep reading names that want forgetting. Said the pines grow hungry when you speak the ones they remember. When the files vanished, so did the people who tried to retrieve them. In 1969, a junior archivist named Elaine Morris filed a report after discovering that 5 burial permits from the 1930s, each for individuals named Ashridge, were never entered into the Preston County Burial Index. When she attempted to escalate the matter, she was reassigned within 2 weeks to the State Mineral Office, where she remained until retirement. Her request was marked non-urgent and shredded after reassignment. She later confided in a colleague who kept a napkin where Elaine had scribbled, "They weren't buried, they were fed." And then came Pastor Llewellyn Fox of Hazelwood Baptist Church, a man who had ministered in the region since 1948 and who had, until his death in 1987, kept a private archive of local folklore, ghost stories, and demon-rooted heresies, as he called them. In an interview recorded in 1981 for the now-defunct Appalachian Oral Memory Project, Fox admitted openly, "We knew about the trees, knew what the Ashridges did to keep them quiet, but if you burn the pages, the name can't call back. That's what we were told, and so that's what we did." The interviewer, Margot Brill, pressed him further, asking what exactly they burned. Fox paused, then replied, "Ledgers, births, maps, hymnals, even the wood carvings they made, anything that carried the marks, especially the ones with circles of teeth." When the recording was archived, that segment had been erased, magnetically scrambled. The index entry listed it as static distortion, inaudible, redacted upon request of a state. From the mid-1950s onward, the state shifted its stance on hollow-related lore. Historical preservationists were discouraged from pursuing rural church records. The Appalachian Cultural Fund, once dedicated to restoring family cemeteries, ceased all work in Preston County between 1959 and 1974. Even surveyors from the Department of Natural Resources avoided the area. One 1973 memo warns field agents, "Avoid the East Fork of Deerhorn Trail." Mapping. Attempt in '62 led to compass failures and loss of signal. That territory no longer reflects approved cartographic expectations. The maps erased it. The clergy erased it. The law erased it. The wires caught fire when the names were spoken too long, and those who did remember, those who whispered what happened, were offered other reasons to forget. Pay raises, transfers, retirement. Or in the case of Martha Kilgore, a schoolteacher from Nettlebrush who had once taught a child named Sabine A. a warning carved into her doorframe. Ashridge taught her to hum, "We don't want the tune again." Martha left her home within 2 days. She died in Georgia. Her death certificate was signed R. Ashridge. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And to this day, Box 7 has never been reconstructed. It is the only file in Preston County history that has not been recompiled following fire, flood, or war. The official reasoning: insufficient community interest. But when you dig into the audit trail, every request to rebuild that record, every file tagged Ashridge, ends with a timestamp and one line: referred to vault, access denied. And in Preston County, everyone knows what that means. Because if you bury a story deep enough and feed the earth what it demands, even the records won't remember how to scream. The oldest standing structure in Preston County doesn't appear on any state preservation list. It isn't listed in architectural surveys. No restoration funds have ever been allocated to it. And yet the Ashridge cabin, perched crookedly at the eastern edge of what remains of Deerhorn Trail, still stands. Not with pride or decay, but with a kind of unmoving refusal to rot, shift, or collapse. It exists against time rather than within it. It does not show up on GPS. It never has. The forestry maps mark the area as impassable, but hikers still find it, or rather, are found by it. One such man was Harlan Teague, an amateur naturalist from Morgantown, who in 1987 documented a trip through Deerhorn on a standard trail registry log. His entry, written in smudged pencil and filed later that year in the Monongahela Hiker's Ledger, reads, "House looked like it hadn't aged. No vines, no sunwear. Wood still had grain like it was cut yesterday, but it smelled like sap and rot and wet wool. Someone whispered, 'Stay.' No one else was with me." That's the only sentence Teague ever wrote about the cabin. He never returned to the trail, and later developed what family called a mild audio hallucination, a constant humming in his ears, always low, always vibrating at a frequency he said matched the sound of wind through pine. He died in 1994. His death certificate listed cause as inner ear trauma and stress-induced cardiac arrest. The doctor who signed it, R. Ashridge, nurse practitioner, had no state license on record. The cabin itself appears in at least 4 different unregistered land sketches, drawn by surveyors, travelers, and even a 1923 coal mapping draft that labeled the area as structure present, uninhabitable. But unlike other abandoned mountain homes, the Ashridge cabin was never claimed, sold, torn down, or trespassed upon by anyone from the county. Not because it was protected, because it was avoided. And yet in 1999, a group of amateur paranormal investigators calling themselves Appalachian Spirit Documentaries attempted what they referred to in their forum posts as the Ashridge Haunt Capture. None of their footage was ever released, but a tape labeled Session C Indoors was leaked anonymously in 2002 by a former member who refused to give their name, but posted the following message on a now-defunct message board. It started raining pine needles. Inside. No windows open. The roof wasn't cracked. But they fell from the ceiling like ash. We didn't hear them land. We just saw them on our jackets, on our eyes. The video footage, which has been partially preserved in digital format, shows the group entering the cabin around dusk. The camera shakes, not from fear, but from distortion. Every light they bring flickers, including handheld battery lanterns. On the audio track, what begins as the sound of wind transitions into something far lower, a droning hum that persists throughout the footage, though none of the participants acknowledge it in real time. At timestamp 2147, the lead cameraman gasps and drops the lens. When the image reorients, pine needles appear to be drifting downward from the top of the frame, despite the ceiling being solid and intact. The last clear image shows one of the investigators standing silently in front of the cabin's hearth. She has her hands pressed to her ears. Her mouth moves, No sound comes out. The camera cuts to black. 3 of the 5 team members never spoke publicly again. One was institutionalized in South Charleston in 2003 for what was described as chronic reverberation hallucinations. In his intake paperwork, under cause of breakdown, he wrote, "It's still standing. That's what's wrong. Things that wait don't need food or faith, just shape." The cabin's interior, according to unverified floor plans drawn by the team, consists of only 2 rooms. One main living space with a stone hearth, a pine wood table nailed into the floor, and a single rocking chair bolted to the boards. The second room is smaller. No door. Just a heavy curtain made from stitched linen. No one in the footage crosses its threshold. The curtain moves, but no breeze is present. What's perhaps most unsettling is that despite its preservation, no one has been able to determine when the house was built. There is no construction record, no lumber delivery, no plat. Property tax ledgers from 1911 list the parcel as unbuildable terrain. Yet the house stands, oriented perfectly along the spiral of nearby pines that, according to a 2006 University of West Virginia dendrology report, grow clockwise, contrary to all known growth patterns for trees in the region. The spiraling pines are not metaphor. They're measurable. The researcher, Dr. Henrietta Wells, included a GPS heat map of the forest density for the area, but the signal cut out around latitude 39.2850, longitude -79.7403. When they re-established the connection 2 hours later, the GPS pinged exactly 0.4 miles north, but the terrain didn't match any map. The drone they sent in crashed after 8 minutes. Its footage was scrambled except for a single still frame. The cabin, visible through a break in the trees, its roof glistening in late sun. No movement, no animal sounds, just light and pine. In that same year, a local hunter named Francis Doyle vanished in the vicinity of the cabin. His last known location was pinged via hunting GPS wrist unit registered to the Hunters Safety Association of West Virginia. The final coordinates, recorded at 7:14 p.m. on November 3, 2006, land at the same point where the pines begin to spiral. In his recovered camera, the final image is not of prey, not of trail. It is of a grove. Unblurred, perfectly still, but every tree curves, not from wind, but as if leaning inward, towards something. Francis was never found. His body wasn't recovered, but a week later, a park ranger found his rifle resting neatly against the cabin's outer wall. Clean, polished, untouched by weather. Inside the barrel was a bundle of teeth bound in sinew. They say the Ashridge cabin doesn't age, and that may be true, because things don't age when they don't live. They hold, they keep, they root in place what isn't meant to be moved. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And to this day, no birds land near the chimney. No matter the season, no matter the wind. The hearth never grows cold, but it never burns either. The air inside never molds, but it always smells of rot. And when you leave, if you leave, your boots leave behind no prints, only small patches of bark where the grass should have been. This story was never just about the Ashridges. From the beginning, the signs were there, not loud, not televised, but quietly encoded in school ledgers, church excommunications, unspoken rules, and the things that children drew when they thought no one was looking. The further we go into the hollows of Appalachia, the more we find names like Ashridge, mirrored, bent, reflected sideways. Not identical, but familiar, as if the ritual moved house every few generations, never changing the script, only the cast. In Tucker County, tucked just beyond Coketon Ridge, the Blackwood family appears in local archives with a thread of unease that spans nearly 50 years. Their story begins in the February 1924 minutes of the Beulah Creek Congregational Assembly, where Edwin Blackwood, age 56, was formally excommunicated for heretical communion with earthen voices. The charge might have been dismissed as religious paranoia if not for the handwritten addendum in the deacon's margin. Family taught their children the wrong Lord's Prayer, said it had to be spoken with the teeth shut, claimed the Pines could hear mispronunciations. The entire family vanished from the records the following year. No tax filings, no burial permits. But in a 1948 soil grant survey, the Blackwood homestead still appears on the plat map, listed not by name, but by a description in the ledger's notes. Parcel A17. Home structure sound, but windless. Pine trees grow unnaturally close around the southern wall. Air inside has taste of sap. The same report includes a single field annotation. Children's room contains bark dolls with no eyes. House contains no mirrors. Fireplace stuffed with pine boughs, unburnt. In Clay County, west of Ivydale, the 1955 attendance log of Blackberry Fork Elementary lists 5 siblings, all with the surname Grinshaw, enrolled in grades 1 through 5. Their guardianship line is blank, but every one of their medical notes is marked filed by special request. The only surviving artifact from their time in school is a bulletin board photograph published in a 1956 school newsletter, now housed in the Clay County Historical Archive. In the background, almost invisible at first, 5 small drawings hang beneath the children's art section. Each one shows the same image, a tree with eyes. Not cartoon eyes, not smiling faces, but a vertical pine etched in black pencil with dozens of small eyes sprouting along the trunk, some open, some weeping, some staring blankly ahead. In one drawing, a child had sketched a mouth into the roots, wide and humming. The caption beneath that one reads, "It talks when no one else will." The newsletter was pulled from public circulation 2 weeks after print. The teacher, Gail Horton, transferred to Webster County and refused interviews for the rest of her life. In her retirement diary, found by her niece in 2004, she had written only one entry about Clay County. The drawings weren't the worst part. It was the way the youngest one smiled when I tried to take it down, like he was sorry for me, like he already knew what would happen if I did. In 1993, the then new internet began opening strange doors, and some of those doors revealed what archivists could only speculate on. A post on a genealogy message board, archived under the title "Do the Pines Watch," appeared on March 19th and was deleted within 48 hours. But a user in Illinois, known only by the handle Old Salt Wife, preserved the thread and reposted the contents years later. The original post read, "Looking for info on the Ashridge family. My grandmother, born 1912 in Elgood, WV, said her mother made her feed the pine tree with her blood every October. Said it helped the roots remember who belonged. She called it the family tithe. Said the Ashridges showed her how, that they didn't teach it. They passed it, same way you pass a sickness, quiet and close, from mouth to mouth." No one responded. The thread was flagged as misinformation and closed. A moderator note said the user had violated community rules by promoting occult beliefs, but the IP address used to post the message originated from a senior care facility in Mercer County, West Virginia, where a Margaret Ellen Tripp, age 81, had been living at the time. In her nursing log from 1994, a night shift nurse documented that Mrs. Tripp requested to sleep on the floor beneath a window, so the pine can see I'm still here. The same entry includes a brief report of the patient humming a non-verbal melody into her hands, while pressing pine needles into her palms until they bled. She passed away the following spring. Her personal effects included a box of dried leaves, several dolls made of straw and twine, and a folded page torn from a hymn book, rewritten with phrases not found in any published translation. The sap drinks what the blood forgets. The bark remembers. The hum seals the debt. These are not isolated events. They are repetitions, echoes that root deeper every time a town forgets what it buried. From Nicholas County to Upshur, from Hazleton to Boone Run, stories trickle in, of families who refused to cut certain trees, of children born with their mouths shut tight until their first night alone in a pine room, of girls who left baskets of fingernail clippings beneath the floorboards each month as thanks. In a 1962 psychiatric report from Glenville Asylum, one patient, Samuel Reardon, claimed his family's root doctor taught him never to say the names of the dead aloud, not because of grief, but because it invites the tree that holds them. His file includes one haunting note from a session dated June 4, 1963. He claims the pines near the porch call him by name. Says if he stops answering, they'll bury the house itself. Says that's what happened to his aunt. Says there's no grave because the tree took her mouth first. Again and again, these names appear: Blackwood, Grinshaw, Tripp, Reardon, and always, Ashridge. As if the name is less a family than a contagion, less a surname than a shared instruction, passed like scripture carved into the underside of memory. They say babies born in those hollows didn't cry. Not once, not ever. And if they did, the bells would ring. No bells ring now. But if you drive through certain parts of Tucker County, the older mailboxes still bear carvings. Not initials, not addresses, but spirals etched deep into the wood. Spirals that match the tree rings of pines known to have grown near Deerhorn Trail, twisted clockwise, unnatural, refusing to follow the same rhythm as the rest of the forest. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And to this day, school children still draw trees with eyes. No one teaches them to. No one shows them how. They just do. The roots are always showing. The eyes are always open. And the tree never casts a shadow. The forest doesn't forget. It doesn't heal like people do, or move on like towns forced to pave over their past. The forest remembers quietly, not in words or photographs, but in rituals that re-emerge, in echoes that return decades too late, and in children too young to have heard the stories repeating the phrases word for word. On March 3, 2019, in Morgantown, West Virginia, 79 years to the day since Ruth Ashridge's body was discovered hanging upside down in a pine tree near Deerhorn Hollow, a second-grade teacher at Eastover Primary School filed an internal behavior report. It was brief. Just 5 lines. Student humming an unknown hymn during independent reading. Claimed he learned it from the pine man behind the fence. Stated the man said not to stop. Repeatedly pressed forehead to desk while humming. Would not respond when asked to stop. Parents contacted. The child's name was redacted in the official file, which now resides in a locked digital folder under student behavioral cases. Unexplained. But the teacher, Janelle Rosser, who had no disciplinary history in her 18-year teaching career, chose to resign 3 weeks later. When asked why in her exit interview, she allegedly said, "I know a child's voice. That wasn't one." Later that same month, a series of TikTok videos began circulating within a tight cluster of Appalachian urban legend communities. One user, at PineWatcher32, a 17-year-old from Arnettsville, uploaded a sequence of clips showing hand-carved bone dolls arranged in a spiral pattern near the entrance to a long, unused fire road branching from Deerhorn Trail. The dolls, bound with red thread and plant sinew, had pine bark masks nailed to their faces, and one clip zoomed in to reveal a sigil carved into the earth beside them, a spiraling pine cone surrounded by 12 evenly spaced notches. The video reached 42,000 views before being taken down, not for violating terms of service, but for being part of a now-removed audio track, a glitch that TikTok later called a regional moderation issue. The original sound attached to the video was titled humroots.wav. According to cached versions of the now-deleted audio, the track contained low-frequency droning interspersed with what sounded like reversed speech, but no transcript has been confirmed. Several viewers commented that their phones vibrated during playback, despite no haptics being used in the app. One user claimed the sound pulled her forward like it was behind her eyes. Another said they tasted iron. And then, in May 2021, a Facebook post from a Charleston user in a local dream discussion group triggered a wave of silent recognition. Does anyone know what it means to dream of a woman sewn shut in the trees? I've never seen this woman. Her lips are knotted closed. I don't even believe in this stuff, but I wake up tasting sap. I taste it in my teeth. It's sweet and wrong. The comments filled slowly, one by one. First joking, then quiet, then confessional. My sister used to wake up with bark on her pillow. My grandma said if the tree has eyes, you don't ask questions. I drew a spiral tree in 3rd grade and don't know why. It was covered in mouths. The original poster later deleted her account. But cached versions of the post circulated through Reddit, private Discord servers, and eventually the back corners of genealogy forums. The same ones where threads like, "Do the Pines Watch?" and "Returned Below," meaning were buried years before. This isn't nostalgia. It isn't folklore reviving in fan art or creepypasta. This is something reawakening. Patterns have begun to reassert themselves in the edges of digital record-keeping, in the residues of rural psychology, and in the margins of school logs. The names don't repeat exactly, but the behaviors do. A 2020 teacher's aide at Summit Creek Middle School documented a student ritual where children took turns bearing worries in the mulch pile behind the gym. The burial involved drawing a circle with 12 dots and whispering into it. None of the students admitted to inventing the game. In a 2022 property transfer in Preston County, a 4-acre lot bordering Deerhorn Trail was sold to a private buyer listed only as R. Ashridge Holdings, LLC. The contract was filed electronically, and a clerk at the county office, in a now-deleted tweet, claimed that the signature on the deed looked identical to one from the 1930s. The tweet read, "Same curl on the R, same pressure marks." Looked handwritten, but printed digitally. And when I touched the screen, I felt splinters. The county never responded to requests for comment. In October of that same year, a TikTok user hiking near Bear Hollow reported finding a pine tree surrounded by dolls made from bone, hair, and bark. She took one home. That night, according to a video posted the next morning, which has since been removed, she woke up with sap in her hair and her pillow folded into a perfect spiral. One line of text over the clip read, "Is this the Ashridge thing people were talking about?" And that's where this all turns, where it stops being about one family, one forgotten town, or one generation of silence. Because what's happening now is not historical. It is ongoing. The pines are not done, and the rituals, long presumed buried, are being remembered without being taught. They say memory is stored in scent, in sound, in rhythm, not just in neurons, but in the muscle of places, the bones of landscapes, the rings of trees that never stopped listening. The Ashridges may have fed the roots, but now others are finding the trail again, not through stories passed down, but through instinct, like fish returning upstream without knowing why. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. And to this day, kids who've never heard the name Ashridge are humming songs no one taught them. Not loud, not in class, but alone, in corners, with heads tilted just slightly toward the window. They hum with their mouths closed, and every once in a while, they stop and listen. Some names die when the bodies do. Others die when the town forgets how to pronounce them. But a few names, too old, too sharp, too rooted, seem to rot backward, becoming clearer the more you try to bury them. Ashridge is one such name, and it has not changed, not once. The earliest appearance comes from a fading birth ledger recovered from Clay County, dated August 1903, catalogued under the now demolished Grindale Chapel of Midwives, filed by a nurse named Elna Marsh, who later disappeared in 1911. The ledger, page 27, line 6, male child, born at twilight, full term, breathing irregular, eyes open before crowning, Name given, Richard Ashridge. Parentage, unknown. Witnessed by R. Ashridge. What follows is a jagged line of midwife initials written in hurried script, except for the signature R. Ashridge, which glides across the page in a perfectly fluid cursive, unbroken by pressure or tremor. Even back then, it was off. Not because it was old, but because it wasn't. It had no age at all. Compare it to a 1942 coroner's intake sheet from the death of Miriam Ashridge, listed as age 89, found mummified inside a boarded pantry in a house marked for foreclosure just east of Somersville. Filed under County Record Number 11K77, the document reads, "Decedent discovered in seated position. Surrounding materials indicate death occurred at minimum 17 years prior to discovery. No visible decay, despite absence of preservation." And there again, in the corner, under witness present at scene, document co-signer, the same signature, R. Ashridge. Identical flourishes, same long tail under the G, same upward lean on the R, same rhythm, not similar, identical. In 2019, a death certificate issued in Morgantown raised similar eyebrows at the registrar's office. A man was pronounced deceased after what police described as a cardiac incident during prayer. He had no ID on him, but the witness who called emergency services told authorities his name was Reverend Richard Ashridge, and he was a spiritual caretaker at a forest-based chapel just north of Deerhorn Hollow. The officer on scene reported that the man's body did not appear fresh, though the skin showed no decomposition. The coroner who signed the certificate, Dr. Aidan Mallory, later told his assistant that he felt like he was embalming a statue. But the real fracture came when Dr. Mallory submitted the paperwork to the county office and was asked who had signed the field report, because they'd already received a signature from someone else. And that name, again, R. Ashridge, from 1903 to 2019. The same hand. No deviation, no regression, no frailty. Most damning of all was a handwriting analyst's internal memo, found tucked inside the Ashridge archive box now sealed at the McDowell Historical Forensics Center. This is not evolution. This is not human handwriting changing over time. This hand would belong to someone who never aged. No tremor, no variance in ink pressure. The rhythm, the tilt, the stroke weight, all of it identical across documents separated by over a century. There is no analog precedent for this in forensic handwriting. The analyst, a woman named Darlene Cosgrove, reportedly requested to be removed from all archival projects following her review of the Ashridge files. In a final written note submitted with her resignation, she included a line often cited by folklorists. Names hold when blood doesn't, and the trees know which ones to keep speaking. But the clearest fracture in the modern digital record appeared in January 2023, when a local obituary board in Greenbrier County briefly published the following entry: Rebecca Ashridge, aged 142, no known children, no listed residents, born unknown, died unknown, survived by none. Funeral closed to public. Signature witness R. Ashridge. It stayed up for less than 19 hours before being removed. No one claimed to have submitted it. No local funeral homes admitted any connection, but the archive page had already been cached. The most unsettling part of the post wasn't the claim of age, or the absence of birth records, or even the fact that it listed the same surname twice. It was that in the footer of the cached version, in grayed-out metadata where most sites list authorship software or copyright notes, one line sat silently, filed via user RASHRIDGE1903. To this day, no web developers have been able to explain the syntax. The obituary host used no account-based system. There was no back-end user field that would allow for a direct submission from an external entity. And when the code was reviewed, line by line, they found the user didn't exist. But the obituary did. And it was signed, just like all the others. So we ask, not out of paranoia, but out of desperate curiosity. What does a name like that attach to? Is it a person? A title? A family curse passed like land between bloodlines too twisted to untangle? Or is it a function of the pact itself? The name that signs the ritual into permanence, the one that remembers even if the forest forgets, the one that breathes through paper, because names are not supposed to outlive handwriting. Signatures are supposed to fade, shake, degrade, disappear. They're supposed to fall apart with the hands that made them. But not this one. The Ashridge name holds, and with it, the line holds. The forest holds. If every appearance of that name marked a document that sealed something shut, a death, a birth, a transfer, a witnessing, then what does it mean that it keeps showing up? That no matter the year, no matter the medium, the name keeps signing the end of things? She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for writing it down. And now that it's written, the forest doesn't need to whisper. It just waits for another form, another file, another name to sign. And to this day, when archivists at the Preston County Records Building open File 13C, the ink in the signature of R. Ashridge is never dry. They've tested it. The paper is brittle, the stamp faded, but the name, somehow, always smudges. It ends in a coordinate. Not a grave, not a name, just a location. 39.4389 degrees north, 79.6897 degrees west. A point that, when entered into government land survey maps, yields only static. A blank field in the forestry management database, labeled void tag CX-0000. No soil tests, no logging permits. No park rangers assigned to that plot since 1967. The trees in that section are marked as non-participating biomass. The term is meaningless. Trees don't participate, unless they're fed. It was a Freedom of Information Act request, filed by a local archivist in Elkins. Name redacted, request number visible only in part. F31B9421. The request was for land deeds related to Ashridge Hollow, a stretch of dense pine canopy that appears on topographic maps from the 1890s, but is conspicuously absent from all surveys post-1958. The response arrived 3 weeks later, a plain manila envelope, unsealed. No postmark, no agency return address, no cover sheet. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed with a mechanical ribbon, on a page water-stained and brittle around the edges, like it had been pulled from a drawer that hadn't been opened in years. The message read only, "They fed the pines to stay forgotten. You have unbalanced the root." No closing, no agency header, no initials. Just that. As if it was a warning, or worse, a receipt. Attempts to trace the origin of the document failed. Postal logs from the Regional Sorting Center list no such envelope inbound to the recipient's address. Surveillance at the post office showed no drop-off. Local postal workers said they don't remember seeing anything like it, though one mentioned a man in black walking barefoot during the snow that week, smiling at the building but never going in. No photo exists of him. The security footage for that day was overwritten by error. When the recipient took the page to the West Virginia Office of Environmental Preservation, she was told the file didn't qualify as archival material, that it could be anyone's attempt at historical fan fiction. But when she read it aloud in the office lobby, a janitor, seated 30 feet away and reportedly hard of hearing, began to bleed from both nostrils. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later muttered in his sleep, "Root rot from the soul outward." Nobody knows who they were, the ones who fed the pines. Nobody knows what they fed them, but we know what they got in return. Records erased, census gaps, children who went mute, families who vanished but still held property, birth certificates signed by hands that never changed, names repeated like incantations across ledgers, and trees, always pine, carved, bound, circled, and still standing long after the houses around them collapsed from wind and rot. The forest remembers. But it only speaks when you get too close. Not physically, spiritually, bureaucratically. You file a request, you dig too far. You say the name too loud or too often or with too much certainty. And something notices. In 1987, a land surveyor named Henry Kepler attempted to build a recreational trail through a series of forested plots near that GPS coordinate. According to his widow's interview with the Charleston Review, he said the map kept changing. Each morning, when he returned to mark progress, the compass would reverse. The trail markers vanished. One morning, the flags were replaced with tiny dolls made of bark, the same ones from his childhood. But his family never lived near here. His final note before resignation simply read, "The land won't let me draw it." And I think I'm starting to agree with it. The deepest rot of the Ashridge legacy was never the bodies, the rituals, or the hymnals soaked in sap. It was the idea that forgetting was part of the deal, that the forest kept the bargain by keeping the memory sick, unprovable, and circular, that every FOIA request sent was like tugging on a root with your bare hands, not realizing the root was tugging back. We weren't meant to know this. The sentence sounds dramatic, maybe paranoid, until you realize it's not a metaphor. It's a system, a design, a rot-based firewall, one where knowledge is punished and silence rewarded, one where every attempt to name, to log, to archive, is met with redaction, deletion, or death. They fed the pines to stay forgotten, and now we, by watching, by listening, by unsealing this file, have unbalanced the root. So ask yourself, when you last walked through a pine grove, did you hear the hush? Not wind, not birds, but the hush. Like something was swallowing a name before you could speak it. When you sing alone, does your voice feel like it's answering something? Has a file gone missing recently? A family Bible with ripped pages? A photo album with one face always blurred? A land deed with a single page that feels warmer to the touch? Does the name Ashridge hum behind your teeth when you sleep? Does it echo even now, not in your ears, but in the soft pressure behind your eyes, like a word you never meant to remember, yet somehow always knew? We weren't meant to know this, but we do. And now that we do, something else knows we know. And to this day, the Forestry Department's database for GPS 39.4389 degrees north, 79.6897 degrees west is not only blank, it is marked as forbidden. Not restricted, not decommissioned, forbidden. And when you click it, it freezes your browser for 13 seconds exactly, as if something is deciding whether you're allowed to continue. So here's what you do next. If your grandmother warned you never to sing in the trees, if your attic holds a doll made from bark and bone, if your dreams smell like sap, or if a name follows you between waking and sleep, write it, speak it, comment it. Let them know we see what they hid. And subscribe. Not because this is a channel, but because this is a file, and it might vanish before dawn. Because the pines are hungry again, and they remember who tried to forget them.